Hey guys, welcome to another manipulation tutorial with PSD Box. Today I have a tutorial which is a bit more advanced. People have requested more advanced tutorials, and I announced this tutorial on one of my newsletters, and I set you a preview, and this was the image. And today I'll show you how I made this manipulation. As I said, this is a bit more advanced. I will start with all the images cropped. I will not spend time doing that, so I will focus more on showing you how I turn this image from day to night, because this is the original image. This is the start image, so you can see we made some pretty dramatic changes here to turn this into a night scene, and making all this headlights and all these light effects. So this tutorial will be about how to make all these light effects and shadows and things like that. So let me close this and start over again. This is the image that we will start working with. Yeah, let me see the canvas. It's a bit big, so I'll make it smaller because I'm also recording the video. I'll use about 2000 pixels for the canvas. So the first thing I want to do is get rid of this sky, because we need a darker one. So I'll turn this into a normal layer by pressing the Alt key and double clicking on the layer. And I will use the color range selection method to select the sky. First I'll make this rectangular selection and go to image, to select color range. And I'll select this part of the sky, press the shift key to get that plus icon and add areas to the selection. And now I'll use this sliders to adjust what will be my selection here. And let's see if I deactivate this clusters option and click OK. So that's my selection. I will create now a layer mask, because I want to mask it and I have to invert it first. And I'll have to refine some parts here because I need that back. Make sure the opacity and the flow are to 100% and paint with white to get back some of the highlights here. And also some of the details here, bring them back. Now right now this selection is quite horrible, but we'll fix it in a second. So what we need next is add a darker sky there, and I chose a cloudy sky for that, and I'll paste it on a new layer, and of course I have to make it smaller. And the reason why I chose a darker sky is because that will help me to create that dark night effect that I'm looking for. Okay, so as you can see, the selection here, the edges are really bad. So let me first rename this and expand a bit the panel dock and name this background. So in order to fix the edges, what I did is I used layer styles, and I used inner shadow, and I used an angle of about 125 degrees or something like that, and a distance of about 50 pixels, and that will darken all those edges and they will not be visible, because we will make this whole part darker and it will not be visible, so it doesn't really matter. Just make them darker like that and increase the opacity to 100%, and that way you make this poles look a lot darker. So we will have that car standing here and all the light will be here, so the far end of this street will be dark, and also the top. So what I did is I used the gradient overlay style, and I used a -90 degree angle, and use this gradient, set the blend mode to overlay, and then set the opacity to about 25%, and that way we add even more darkness here on the top, as you can see, and we kind of shift the light. Let me zoom out a bit so you can see. If I deactivate the gradient overlay, you can see now the top is darker and this part is brighter just a bit. So we kind of shift the light, and if you want more effect, just increase the opacity a bit, but not too much. So once I got here, I used the first adjustment, and I used Hue Saturation and set saturation to -40. And then the next adjustment that I used is a gradient map. And the colors that I used some pretty dark colors. This is the first color that I used, and for the highlights I used another dark color like that, and click OK. And the blend mode that I used for this is Hue, and set the opacity at 100%, so leave it there, and that way you have this kind of a yellowish tone to the whole image, and also a bit more desaturated. Next I added another gradient map, and this time I used other colors. So I used a dark black for the shadows, and for the highlights I use this orange color. Click OK, and the blend mode that I use for this is soft light at 50%. And with this adjustments we made the image even darker, and we gave it that yellow tone that I liked. You can use other color combinations if you want to, but I knew that I will make the headlights yellow, so that's why I went for this colors. The next steps are all about making shadows and things like that, but we need to have the car here in place so that we know how to paint those shadows. So I'll go ahead and open the car image. As I said, I already have it extracted from the original background, but this is really easy to extract because it's taken on a white background, so it's really easy. So I'll paste the car here. Have to make it smaller. It's a good idea to use smart objects if you don't know how big an object should be, because that way you can scale back up without losing quality. But I think this one looks okay for now, so I'll place it here like that. So once I have the car here, I can start painting the shadows, and I'll paint those shadows under the car. So I will get the brush tool, use a black foreground color, increase the brush size and use a really soft brush, and decrease the brush opacity and flow to about 50%, maybe even more. Let's see how that looks, and just start painting a few shadows here. I'll decrease the opacity even more to about 25, and just paint this part of the sky here and these walls like that, and also this highlights here. And especially these ones up here. I didn't like those lines there, so make sure you use a big brush like that. Okay, that's a lot better. Make sure you also paint these parts here. Not too much though, because the lights that we'll have here will be we will paint some lights here on the wall, so don't make your job more difficult than it has to be. So we have those shadows there. Let's call this soft shadows, and let's make the main shadow of the car. So what I'll do is create a new layer under the car, get the rectangular marquee tool and make a selection like that. Well, actually I'll use the polygonal lasso tool because it's a lot easier. And just make a selection like that. And fill it with black. And now use the Gaussian blur filter and add some blur to it to make it softer. And now use the move tool to reposition that shadow. So now you can see a before and after, and you can make it bigger if you want to. And something like that, and I will apply the filter again, pressing Ctrl F to soften it even more. And you can decrease the opacity just a bit if you want to, but well, let's leave it at 100%. So now we have some shadows, we have the car here, but as you can see the car is not blending with the background at all. So in order to fix that, I used layer styles again, so double click on the layer to open the layer styles. And I used gradient overlay because I wanted to have the top part of the car darker. So I'll change the gradient to black to transparent, change the angle to -90, and now position this gradient like that, increase the scale to 150% and change the blend mode to soft light. And you can see the before and after. It makes the whole car a bit darker. Now more adjustments. I use the Hue Saturation adjustment as clipping mask and set the saturation to -30 because I wanted to take away some of the color on the car. Then in order to darken the top part even more, I created a new layer as a clipping mask, and let's name this Top Shadows, and get the brush tool again, use a big soft brush. Let's leave the opacity at 26, it's okay, and just start painting the top part of the car. Let's zoom in a bit. And also this part of it. Okay, something like that. We still need to add more shadows there on the sky, but we will do that a bit later on. Well, let's do that now actually. So go under the car, create a new layer, get the gradient tool, or you can use the brush tool again if you want to, but I used the gradient tool, select the reflected gradient, and I chose the black to transparent again, just created a gradient like that to add some darkness there, but I need a bigger gradient like that because I wanted to make the whole scene darker, including those walls. And then just use the eraser tool to erase this bottom part like so, and decrease the opacity just a bit, just so that you can see some of the detail there on the background, so you can see a before and after. And maybe we have too many shadows here on the top part of the car, so I'll use the eraser tool and reduce the opacity a bit, make the brush smaller, and just reduce the opacity even more, and also the flow, and take away some of that shadow because it was too much. So now we have something a bit more realistic. Maybe you can paint some more shadows here on the floor using a low opacity soft brush. Use the brush, not the eraser tool. Okay, I think the shadows look pretty nice now. What we have to do now is add our model here. But before we do that, let's start creating the lights, because That way we can create the shadows of the woman and create the light effects on the woman according to the lights on the car. So let's start creating those headlights for the car. And I'll create a new layer, get the elliptical marquee tool, create the selection like that, and fill the selection with black. I explained this technique in some of my tutorials. I'll make a separate tutorial only showing you how to make light effects like this, but for now just follow this one. So once you have the selection and filled it with black, go to Filter, Render, Lens Flare, and choose the 105mm prime, and just make sure you center that there. So just center that on your shape like that, and click OK. And now change the blend mode of this layer to screen. You will see that you have some problems because the edges are too bright, and the way you fix that is using levels and just increase the shadows, and that way those hard edges go away and you have only the light remaining here. So put that in front of the car headlights, and now duplicate it and put it on the other side and just rotate it a bit because you can see those lines there. So you want to avoid that. Just rotate it slightly. You can also make it smaller or bigger if you want to. And now duplicate these two layers and move them to the other side. Position them there and rotate both lights a bit. Once you have all the lights ready, select the 4 layers and press Ctrl E to merge them. And now change the blend mode again to screen and add a Hue Saturation adjustment layer as clipping mask. Let's name this layer Headlights Flares. And I chose to use the colorize option and set the hue to 49 and the saturation to 10. That just to give that yellow look to the lights. And I wanted to create some lights here on this bottom headlights here as well. So I use the brush tool again, set the blend mode of this layer to color dodge, and use an orange color. Let's see if this one works, but let's increase the brush size to 100% and create some lights like that. Okay, that's better. Of course you can paint here as well, but let's leave that there as it is. Now the secret to make these lights more realistic is just using more layers. So I'll create a new layer and I'll name this Painted Lights, and I will change the blend mode to color dodge again, and just use a big soft brush, and I used a color like this one, more or less a similar color to this, and just started to paint. Now you have to reduce the opacity of the brush. Let's see if 50% works, and just add more glow there on the lights. And if you want more color, just increase the saturation, but try to use the same luminosity, and just paint a few glows of light. And the next thing we need to do is paint some lights here on the wall. So I'll increase the brush opacity and the flow a bit, and just paint some light there like that. And maybe I'll decrease the saturation and increase the luminosity of the color just a bit. And this is just like dodging and burning, which we will use next, but to create light effects. So definitely add more colors here on the bumper and on the floor, and here on the wall, like that. Not there. So a before and after. Now, as you can see, and it's likely to happen to you as well, is that you add too much light there, and it just burns the whole thing and you don't see any detail. So you can see a before and after. You still want to see some of the texture there, so use the eraser tool, use a really low opacity eraser, and just start erasing part of that. And also here on the glow here, I want to remove some of that effect. Let's go to the other side as well. You can use another lens flare for the bottom lights as well, but I just use the brush tool. And if you're not happy with the color or with the brightness, on this painted lights layer you can use the levels adjustment and just increase or decrease the brightness of that, and you can see how you can really change the aspect of the light. I'll use that, and you can also use Hue Saturation if you want to add more color to the light, or if you want to change the color, but obviously this one doesn't look too realistic. So let's leave it on that orange color, but less saturated, like that. So this is our painted light. Now we can add the model, so I'll open the model. One thing I want you to notice is that I left some space here around the hair because I will mask that manually, and this part here I just forgot to mask that, but I'll do that later. Select all, copy, and just paste the woman here. And one thing I'll do right away is just use the spot healing brush tool to fix this. I don't know what that is. Okay, and now I have to make it smaller, but let me rename the layer first. And I'm holding the shift key in order to keep the proportions. And let's see, about here I think it was on the original image. And just place it there. And now let's mask this part. Here I'll create a layer mask, and I use a hard brush. Just switch colors, increase the brush size to 100%, and just mask this part. Actually I can use the magic wand tool because this is a solid color and it will be a lot quicker. Fill that with black, but as you can see the edges are really bad. So what I will do is invert the selection with Control I and use the refine edge, and I'll shift the edges just a bit and increase the feather slightly, and now increase the contrast but not too much, something like that, and increase the smoothness to 5. Let's see if that works, and let's set this to layer mask, and that way we masked that part there. Okay, and now let's mask that hair, and I used one of the brushes here, one of the default brushes, and just make a first rough masking. And then use a smaller brush and refine my masking. And right now you can see that it doesn't look too nice, but what I'll do is change the colors to white and paint back some of the hair And I'll reduce the opacity of the brush as well. And you can use the same inner shadow trick that you used to darken the poles, because this part of the woman's body will be in shadow, and you can darken that part. So that's my hair masking, really basic. Let me reposition the woman just about there. Now I have to make the woman match the background, and the way we do that is using adjustments. So the first thing I'll do is use a Hue Saturation and reduce the saturation to -40. And another thing that I want to do is start adding some effects using layer styles. So the first thing I'll do is use a gradient overlay, because I want this part of the woman to be darker than the right side. So I'll use a black to transparent, but first I have to reset my colors. Go back to gradient overlay and choose the black to transparent, and set the blend mode to overlay, and reduce the opacity to, let's see, about 40%, and increase the size. You can click and move to position this gradient wherever you want. Let's leave it there. Let's see before and after. So we add a bit of darkness on that part. Let's see, maybe soft light works best. Yeah, I like soft light better. Okay, something like that. I'll increase the opacity just slightly, and a before and after. Okay, and the next thing that I'll add is a levels adjustment as clipping mask. The Hue Saturation was also used as clipping mask, and I'll increase just a bit the shadows. Let's go 4, and for the midtones we have to make this darker, so let's go to 1.6. It's too dark. Let's go with 1.75. 0.8, it's enough. Okay, so that depends on how you like the image, but okay. And one other thing that I want to add is some rim lights here from the car headlight. So I'll use inner shadow, and of course the angle has to be something bigger than 90 degrees because the light is coming from the right side. And let's add about 6 pixels, and the size, let's go to about 20. Set the blend mode to color dodge, and let's see what color we can use. Something like that works nice. So it just adds a bit of light there, and this is a technique that I use in many of my tutorials. And you can set the opacity to 100, or just use a brighter color. Do not use a too saturated color, because you can see it's not looking too nice. Use just a bit of tint there, and almost gray, as you can see, and click OK. It's too strong to highlight there on the hands, so I'll probably use a darker tone. Okay, something like that. Just use your judgment there. One other thing that I want to add is some more light here on the face, and I'll do that using a layer and a brush. I'll use a soft brush. Leave the opacity to 40, and let's set the flow as well to 40, and change the blend mode to, you can use overlay, but I like color dodge. And again, I'll use a unsaturated yellow color like this. Let's see if this one works. I don't really like how that looks. And reduce the opacity a bit. So you can see that this is just a trial and error until you find the right color, and you can always use the hue saturation and desaturate the color if you think it's too strong. Okay, so before and after. Let's name this face light. And one thing that I forgot to do is smoothen the skin, and I use the mixer brush tool for that. So what I have to do is disable all these layers and create a new layer, and I'll name this smooth skin. Okay, next you can add some shadows for the woman. Do this really quick using the brush tool. So just paint a few shadows there, like that. When you make soft shadows using the brush tool, it's better to use low opacity brushes and just go several times over the same area. And paint some stronger shadows right here where the boots touch the ground. Okay, and something like that. So you can see that it looks a lot better with those shadows there. Now you can use the dodge and burn technique. So I'll use my action. I have an action for this, but I already have a tutorial on that. Basically you create a new layer, you fill it with 50% gray from the edit fill menu and choose 50% gray, and then change the blend mode to overlay. And now you can use the dodge tool to enhance the highlights. And let's see, an exposure of about 12. It's okay. And what I'll do is, especially here on the woman's dress, enhance all the highlights. And I'll show you the result when I'm done. I'll just do a quick demo here to show you what you can get with this tool. The important thing when you dodge clothes and things like that is dodge these highlights here on these folds. You will create more dimension, so to say. You make the image look a bit stronger and more, I don't know, I like how it looks. And if you're dodging skin, use a really low exposure of about 4, 5, maybe even less than that, because on the skin the changes are really obvious, but on things like this this dress here, you have to use bigger exposure values. Let's switch to the burn tool, increase the exposure to about 10%, and now go and burn the shadows. You can see that the changes with the burn tool are a lot more visible, so use a low exposure value. Let's go with 5. And now follow all the shadows, sorry, and just burn all the shadows. And in a second you'll see the before and after. I will only burn here the dress of the woman and maybe some parts of the scene, but I will not go on the skin because it's just the same. I just wanted to show you the technique. So let's see a before and after. Before and after. You can see that now this looks a lot stronger, and of course you can do the same here on the floor. Let's use the burn tool to emphasize these cracks here and the texture on the floor, and darken this part of the car's front. If you hear some scratches, it's just my tablet. I'm using the tablet, I'm not using the mouse, but you can use the mouse as well. I made the original artwork using the mouse almost all the time except the dodging and burning, where I used my tablet because it's easier and it's a lot quicker to do, but you can use the mouse as well. I don't like this brush. I'll increase the exposure just a bit here to burn the floor, but it's too much. 16 is too much. And let's enhance a bit the lights here on the wall. Okay, so this is the before and after. Let's burn some parts of the car here as well, and use the dodge tool on this chromed part of the car. Okay, so that's all with dodge and burn. You can spend here as much time as you want. The more details you cover, the better your image will look. But let's move on. One other detail that I wanted to add is a glow of light here, and I used the big soft brush, set the blend mode to screen, and I used the dark orange color. Let's see if this one works, but a bit smaller brush and more saturated. Okay, something like that, but it's too bright. Okay, this one looks better. So just some white here from the car headlights that's passing between the woman's legs. And let me add more details. Let me add the barrel. Remember that I have them extracted from the background. And let me make it just a bit smaller and place it here. And let's name this barrel and name this one glow. Okay, here we need more light effects to make this barrel blend on the background there. The first thing we need to do is darken this part, the right side, and then create some shadows. So I will start with using layer styles to make this part darker, and I used a gradient overlay, and the angle that I used for that is about 180 degrees. Let's go with 175, so that way we have that dark part there, and this one is brighter, because here we have the headlight and the bright part of the barrel is this one. And you can move the gradient there, and change the blend mode of this to linear burn, and change the opacity to 29%. I also used color overlay, and the color that I used for this is a dark brown. There. The blend mode used is soft light at 100%, so leave it there. And now you can see that the barrel is a lot darker and it blends a lot better. We have this bright part and this dark part which is close to the wall. And another detail that I added is a rim light using inner shadow. It's better to start by changing the blend mode to color dodge so that you can see how the colors that you will choose now behave. And I used again an orange color like that, and you can see that light there. Let me use a white color so that you can see it better. And I'll use a color like this. Click OK, and let's see, about 10 pixels of distance, and the size about 17 or 18, and increase the opacity to 100%. And that's all with the layer style. Let's click OK. So let's see a before and after, so you can see it's a really dramatic change. And let's go with the shadows now. Well, actually, let's desaturate this a bit. So create a Hue Saturation as a clipping mask. So press Alt, place the mouse between the two layers and click. And let's reduce the opacity to about -50. And that looks a bit better to me. And now let me make the shadow of the barrel. And I'll use the brush tool. I'll use a soft brush. Set the color to black. Decrease the opacity to about 20%. Make the brush a bit smaller. And just paint some shadows here. This part that is right next to the barrel should be almost completely black. And also darken the bottom part on the floor, like that. And let's make some detail shadows here. So I'll increase the opacity a bit. I'll use a smaller brush and a harder one. Okay, that's better. And just a bit more shadow here. And if the shadow is too strong, like in my case here, it's a bit too strong, I'll use the eraser tool at a really low opacity and flow. And I'll use a soft brush and just take away some of that shadow. Okay, that's a bit better. And let me show you before and after. So that shadow makes things look a lot more realistic. That's why I said that shadows are really important in any manipulation. And more details, then I added this cigar. And again, I'll show you some light effects that I applied to this. So let me paste that here, make it smaller. Like that. And you can see that the top part is a lot darker. So what I'll do is flip it vertically because I want to have the shadow on the bottom, and place it there. And let's name this layer. And in order to lit this cigar, you can search for coals on DeviantArt, and I think I used this image. And what I'll do is right click, copy image, create a new document and paste it here because I only need the part of it. And I'll select this part here, copy it, close this document, paste it here, and I'll create it as a clipping mask. And what I'll do is flip it horizontally and make it smaller like that. Put it there, and I'll use a layer mask for this layer and just mask that hard edge there. Let me increase the brush size and the brush opacity. Okay, so that's how I added the fire on the cigar. And once you have that, create some shadow for the cigar as well, like that. And I use the soft brush. Let me reset my brushes and reduce the opacity to about 20%. So as you can see, when I make shadows, most of the times I use a really low opacity brush and just make multiple passes. So that's how I made the shadow. And then some light effects for the cigar itself. I use the gradient overlay at and the angle that I used for this, I don't know, it depends on how you place the cigar, but try to reduce the scale and try to have parallel. Let's see, this one should be okay. Increase the size, change the blend mode to multiply, and maybe move it slightly, and you can see the effect. It just adds a bit more shadow on the bottom part, but that's just the details. And you can also play with the scale if you want to have more or less effect. And then again, I used inner shadow on color dodge, just to have that light on top again, like that. Reduce the distance and also make the color darker because the light is too strong, and reduce the size. And something like that. So let's see a before and after. Let me deactivate the effects. So before and after. Let's go to 100% zoom. Before and after. Just adds a bit more realism, I think. And in order to make the smoke for the cigar, I use the brush. You can search here on DeviantArt. Let's see. Smoke brushes. And I used one of these brushes here. These are really good for cigar brushes, for cigar smoke, sorry. So I downloaded one of those brush sets that I just showed you, and let me paint some smoke there, like that, and reduce the opacity just a bit, like so. I also added a bottle here, but I'll skip that part because it's just the same as the cigar. Just add that there. Use layer styles to shift the light a bit, and you're good to go. Let's go with the final adjustments. And the first thing that I used is a gradient map, and I use this default gradient, this 3-color gradient, and I set the blend mode to lighten at 15%. And after that, I created a stamp with the keyboard shortcut Shift, Control, Alt, and E, and that creates a stamp of all the layers merged into a new layer, and I went to Image, Adjustments, Variations, and I added more blue and more cyan. Click OK, and I got this blue tone, and I set the blend mode of this to darker color, and the opacity I set it to 10%, so it just adds a bit of blue here on the shadows, and I like this kind of a blue tone to my images. And then I created another stamp, again with Shift, Control, Alt, and E, and I applied the Sharpen Filter, and this is just the final effect to sharpen the image. So I went to Filter, Sharpen, Unsharp Mask, and I used the really high radius. Let's see, this also depends on the canvas size that you use. For this one I'll use about, I don't know, 5 pixels, but for high resolution images like 4000 pixels you can use a radius of about 20 pixels, and reduce the amount. So let's set the threshold to 0 and click OK. And next, change the blend mode to darken, so that sharpens the darker parts of the image. And then duplicate this layer with Ctrl J and set the blend mode to lighten, and that sharpens the brighter parts of the image. And now I'll group this and reduce the opacity of the whole group until I like the sharpening amount that I have. So you can see a before and after. I'll increase the opacity so that you can see it better, because on the video I don't know how you can see it. So before and after, it just adds more sharpness to the image. So that's how I made this manipulation. I hope you liked the tutorial. It was a bit long. I think this was the longest tutorial I ever made, and it was also a bit more advanced, as I already said. It's for more advanced users. Thank you for watching, and if you have any problems or any questions, just post a comment on YouTube or on my website. So again, thanks for watching, and see you on my next tutorial.